Jason Thompson had always been a simple man with simple dreams. He worked hard at his job as an IT specialist, lived alone in his cozy suburban home, and spent most of his free time either gardening or catching up on his favorite TV shows. Life was predictable, but Jason liked it that way. Predictability brought comfort, and after years of saving every penny, he finally had enough to fulfill one of his lifelong goals, a 2-week vacation in Thailand. The idea of traveling halfway across the world thrilled him. For months leading up to the trip, Jason meticulously planned every detail. He booked flights, researched hotels, and even downloaded apps to help him navigate Bangkok's bustling streets. He envisioned himself lounging on pristine beaches, exploring ancient temples, and indulging in delicious street food. It was going to be the adventure of a lifetime, a well-deserved break from the monotony of everyday life. But Jason wasn't just any ordinary homeowner. He was also part of his neighborhood's homeowners association, HOA. While many people dreaded dealing with HOAs, Jason actually enjoyed being involved. He liked contributing to decisions about community events, landscaping projects, and other initiatives aimed at keeping their little corner of suburbia looking its best. Sure, there were occasional disagreements among members, but Jason believed that working together made their neighborhood stronger. Or so he thought. Unbeknownst to Jason, not everyone shared his positive outlook when it came to the HOA. One particular neighbor, Karen Miller, had become increasingly vocal and problematic over the past year. Karen fancied herself the unofficial enforcer of the association. She patrolled the streets like a self-appointed sheriff, scrutinizing every blade of grass, every peeling paint job, and every untidy driveway. Her sharp tongue and relentless criticism earned her nicknames like Karen the Complainer behind her back, though no one dared say such things to her face. To Karen, rules weren't suggestions. They were commandments chiseled in stone, and anyone who failed to follow them was committing nothing short of a mortal sin. Jason hadn't crossed paths with Karen much before, aside from exchanging polite nods during HOA meetings, but recently, she'd started taking issue with his lawn. During Jason's occasional work trips, his front yard sometimes went unattended for a week or two. The grass grew slightly longer than usual, and weeds occasionally sprouted near the flower beds. Most neighbors wouldn't have batted an eye, but Karen noticed everything, and she didn't hesitate to voice her disapproval. At first, it was just passive-aggressive comments left on the HOA group chat. Some homeowners need to remember that maintaining curb appeal benefits the entire community, she wrote, without naming names. Then came emails directly addressed to Jason, reminding him of the HOA's landscaping guidelines. Finally, Karen resorted to knocking on his door late one evening, wagging her finger and lecturing him about responsibility. Jason listened patiently, apologized, and assured her he'd take care of it. After all, he wasn't trying to cause trouble. He simply got busy sometimes. Still, Karen's behavior left a sour taste in his mouth. Who did she think she was, policing everyone's lives? Despite Karen's growing animosity, Jason refused to let her ruin his excitement for the upcoming trip. In preparation for his departure, he tied up loose ends around the house. He paid all his bills ahead of time, arranged for his mail to be held at the post office, and asked his good friend Mark to stop by once a week to water the plants and check for any issues. Everything seemed perfectly in order. Little did Jason know, however, that Karen had already begun plotting something far beyond a mere lecture. You see, Karen wasn't just annoyed with Jason's unkempt lawn. Over time, her frustration had festered into outright resentment. She saw his absence as an opportunity, not just to teach him a lesson, but to make a bold statement to the rest of the neighborhood. If Jason could get away with ignoring HOA rules, what message did that send to others? No, Karen decided drastic measures were necessary. Someone needed to step up and show everyone that neglecting their duties wouldn't be tolerated. And if that meant crossing ethical boundaries, well, Karen convinced herself it was for the greater good. So, as Jason boarded the plane bound for Thailand, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing back home, Karen wasted no time putting her plan into motion. She began gathering information, documents, photos, and details about Jason's property. all while spinning a web of lies so elaborate that even she struggled to keep track of them. What started as a petty grudge was about to spiral into something far more sinister, threatening to upend Jason's life in ways he could never have imagined. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Jason settled into his seat on the airplane, eager to leave behind the stresses of daily life. He scrolled through photos of Thai beaches on his phone, imagining the sun warming his skin and the sound of waves lulling him to sleep. He couldn't wait to disconnect completely, to forget about HOA meetings, Karen's complaints, and everything else weighing on his mind. As the plane soared higher into the sky, Jason felt a sense of freedom wash over him. What he didn't realize was that this newfound freedom would soon turn into a nightmare. Back in his quiet suburban neighborhood, Karen was already setting her scheme in motion. With each passing hour, Jason drifted further from reality, oblivious to the chaos unfolding in his absence. By the time he returned to solid ground, his life and his home would be forever changed. It was the middle of Jason's vacation and everything seemed to be going perfectly. He had spent his days exploring vibrant markets, hiking through lush jungles and relaxing on pristine beaches. The stress of work, the monotony of daily life, and even Karen's nagging complaints about his lawn felt like distant memories. For the first time in years, Jason felt truly carefree. But that all changed one humid afternoon as he sipped mango juice at a cafe in Bangkok. Jason had just finished uploading photos of his latest adventure to social media when his phone buzzed with an unfamiliar notification. It wasn't from any of the usual apps, it was an email from his bank. Curious, he opened it, expecting some routine update about his account balance. Instead, he was met with a message that made his heart stop cold. Your account has been credited with $350,000 from the sale of your property. For a moment, Jason thought it was a mistake. Maybe someone had sent him a phishing email or hacked into his account. He blinked, reread the message, and scrolled through the details attached to the email. There was no denying it, the transaction was real. Someone had sold his house while he was thousands of miles away, and they'd deposited the money directly into his bank account. Panic set in almost immediately. Jason's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Who could have done this? How was it even possible? His hands trembled as he pulled up the contact information for his realtor, Sarah, whom he'd worked with years ago when purchasing the home. She answered on the second ring, her cheerful tone quickly turning serious when Jason explained the situation. I'm sorry, Jason, Sarah said after a brief pause. But yes, your house was listed online last week. A buyer came forward, and the closing happened 2 days ago. The words hit Jason like a punch to the gut. His stomach churned as he struggled to process the reality of the situation. Someone, some stranger, had not only sold his house but also completed the entire transaction without his knowledge or consent. The weight of it all felt surreal, like something out of a movie. Except this wasn't fiction. This was his life. Desperate for answers, Jason reached out to local authorities back home. He explained the bizarre series of events over the phone, hoping someone would take him seriously. But skepticism greeted him at every turn. After all, how could anyone sell a house without the owner's involvement? The detectives he spoke with were polite but dismissive, suggesting he might have misunderstood something or fallen victim to a scam. One officer even joked that maybe Jason had secretly arranged the sale before leaving for Thailand and simply forgotten about it. Frustrated and feeling powerless, Jason turned to Mark, his trusted friend who had agreed to look after the house while he was away. When Mark picked up the call, Jason could hear the confusion in his voice. Wait, what do you mean your house is sold? That's impossible, Mark insisted. I've been checking on it every few days, just like you asked. Everything looked fine until now. Mark promised to investigate further and headed straight to Jason's property. What he found there left him speechless. The for sale sign still stood planted firmly in the front yard, flanked by colorful balloons meant to attract potential buyers. Inside, the house appeared untouched, except for a few pieces of furniture that seemed oddly rearranged. It was clear that someone had staged the place to look more appealing to buyers, though Mark couldn't figure out how or why. Back in Thailand, Jason wrestled with a mix of emotions: anger, fear, disbelief. How could this happen? And who would dare pull off such an audacious scheme? As much as he wanted to enjoy the rest of his trip, the looming uncertainty consumed him. Every notification on his phone sent his pulse racing, fearing another bombshell announcement. His dream vacation had morphed into a waking nightmare. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Jason, Karen Miller was basking in what she believed to be a triumphant victory. Sitting in her living room with a cup of tea, she scrolled through pictures of Jason's house posted on a popular real estate website. The sleek staging, the glowing descriptions, and the flurry of inquiries from eager buyers filled her with a twisted sense of satisfaction. To Karen, this wasn't just about teaching Jason a lesson, it was about proving her authority within the neighborhood. If she could orchestrate something as bold as selling his house, then surely everyone else would fall in line. Karen didn't act alone, of course. She knew she couldn't list the property herself without raising suspicions, so she enlisted the help of a shady acquaintance, a part-time handyman named Greg who occasionally did odd jobs around the neighborhood. Greg had access to certain tools and connections, including a fake ID service he used for personal projects. Together they created forged documents, complete with Jason's signature, or at least a convincing imitation, and submitted them to a title company willing to overlook minor discrepancies for a hefty commission. As far as Karen was concerned, everything had gone according to plan. The house was sold, the money transferred, and Jason none the wiser. At least that's what she assumed. Little did she know her actions had already set off a chain reaction of investigations and consequences that would soon come crashing down on her. Back in Thailand, Jason decided to take matters into his own hands. With limited options available, to him from afar he hired a local attorney specializing in real estate fraud. Through video calls and emails, the lawyer guided Jason on the next steps, advising him to gather as much evidence as possible once he returned home. In the meantime, Jason filed formal complaints with both the police department and the title company involved in the fraudulent sale. Though progress was slow, he refused to give up. This was his home, his sanctuary, and he wasn't about to let anyone steal it away without a fight. Despite the whirlwind of chaos surrounding him, Jason found moments of clarity during his remaining days in Thailand. Staring out at the turquoise waters of Phuket, he reflected on how drastically his life had changed in such a short span of time. He thought about Karen, her smug demeanor, her constant criticisms, and wondered if this whole ordeal stemmed from nothing more than a petty grudge. Was she really capable of orchestrating something so extreme? Or was there more to the story? By the time Jason boarded his flight back to the U.S., exhaustion had replaced panic. The initial shock had worn off, leaving behind a simmering determination to reclaim his life. As the plane soared above the clouds, Jason vowed to uncover the truth, expose those responsible, and ensure that justice was served. No matter how daunting the road ahead might be, he knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't rest until his house and his peace of mind were restored. When Jason finally landed back in the U.S., he was greeted not by the familiar comfort of his home but by a whirlwind of legal battles, unanswered questions, and mounting frustration. The moment he stepped off the plane, he could feel the weight of everything pressing down on him. His vacation tan had faded into a pale exhaustion, and the excitement of Thailand now felt like a distant dream. Instead of driving straight to his house, Jason headed to meet with Detective Harris, the officer assigned to investigate the fraudulent sale of his property. Detective Harris was a seasoned investigator with a calm demeanor that put Jason slightly at ease. Sitting across from him in a small, dimly lit office, Jason recounted every detail he could remember, from the suspicious email alerting him about the sale to the conversations he'd had with his realtor and friend Mark. Harris listened, intently jotting down notes as Jason spoke. While the detective seemed more engaged than the officers Jason had spoken to over the phone, there was still an air of skepticism. Cases like this were rare, almost unheard of, and proving foul play would require concrete evidence. The investigation began with a thorough review of the documents used during the sale. Detectives retrieved copies of the listing agreement, the closing papers and the forged signatures that had somehow slipped past multiple checkpoints. At first glance, the paperwork appeared legitimate. Professional-looking contracts, official, stamps, and even notarized signatures. But upon closer inspection, discrepancies started to emerge. The signature purporting to be Jason's bore little resemblance to his actual handwriting. It was sloppier, less precise, and lacked the subtle flourishes that made his autograph unique. Harris also discovered that the notary who supposedly witnessed the signing hadn't followed proper protocol. When questioned, the notary admitted they hadn't met the supposed seller face-to-face. Instead, they relied on a video call, a loophole that shouldn't have been allowed under state law. This revelation raised red flags, prompting investigators to dig deeper into who exactly had orchestrated the scheme. Surveillance footage from the title company provided another crucial piece of evidence. On the day of the closing, cameras captured a middle-aged woman entering the building, accompanied by a man carrying stacks of paperwork. The woman wore large sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, clearly attempting to conceal her identity. But despite her efforts, something about her posture, her mannerisms, and even the way she carried herself struck a chord with the detectives. After reviewing additional photos and descriptions provided by Jason, it became painfully obvious. The woman in the footage was Karen Miller. Karen's involvement shocked everyone, even those who knew her well. Sure, she had a reputation for being nosy and overly controlling, but no one imagined she'd go so far as to sell someone else's house. Yet, as the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, her motives began to make a twisted kind of sense. For years, Karen had prided herself on enforcing HOA rules with an iron fist. To her, Jason's unkempt lawn wasn't just a minor infraction, it was a personal affront to the neighborhood's standards. Selling his house must have seemed like the ultimate solution, a way to rid the community of what she perceived as a problem while asserting her dominance. Confronted with the mounting evidence, Karen initially tried to deny any connection to the crime. She claimed ignorance, insisting she had nothing to do with the sale or the forged documents. "Why would I sell his house?" she protested during her first interview with detectives. "That's ridiculous." Her tone was defensive, dripping with indignation as if offended by the mere suggestion that she could be involved. But the evidence against her was overwhelming. Investigators uncovered text messages between Karen and Greg, the handyman she had recruited to help execute the plan. In these exchanges, Karen laid out her strategy step by step: how to forge Jason's signature, where to find a compliant notary, and which real estate agent to approach. Emails revealed detailed discussions about staging the house, pricing it competitively, and ensuring the sale went through quickly before anyone noticed. Receipts showed purchases made using funds from the fraudulent transaction, including luxury items Karen had splurged on shortly after the deal closed. Faced with irrefutable proof, Karen's facade crumbled. She broke down in tears during a follow-up interrogation, confessing, but only partially. According to her version of events, Greg had pressured her into participating, claiming he had connections that could pull off the sale without consequences. She painted herself as a victim of manipulation, someone who had simply been caught up in a bad situation. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she sobbed. "I thought we were just teaching him a lesson." Her confession, however, did little to absolve her of responsibility. Whether motivated by greed, spite, or both, Karen had played a central role in orchestrating the fraud. And though Greg shared some blame, it was clear that Karen had been the mastermind behind the operation. Her actions weren't just unethical, they were criminal. As news of the case spread, the neighborhood erupted in shock and disbelief. Neighbors who had once feared crossing Karen now came forward with their own stories of harassment and intimidation. One family recounted how she had threatened to fine them for hanging Christmas lights too early. Another neighbor described how Karen had demanded they repaint their mailbox because it clashed with her vision of uniformity. These accounts painted a picture of a woman consumed by control, willing to bend or break rules to impose her will. Jason, meanwhile, found himself grappling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he felt vindicated knowing that justice was being served. Karen's arrest marked a significant step toward reclaiming his life and his home. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. He had trusted her, as a fellow HOA member, someone working toward the betterment of their community. Instead, she had violated that trust in the worst possible way. With Karen in custody, the focus shifted to reversing the fraudulent sale. Jason's attorney worked tirelessly to file motions and petitions, arguing that the transaction was null and void due to its illegal nature. The process was slow and maddening, requiring endless rounds of paperwork, court appearances, and negotiations. Each delay tested Jason's patience, but he refused to give up. His determination only grew stronger as he imagined walking through the front door of his house again, free from the shadow of Karen's deceit. Throughout it all, Jason leaned on his support system, Mark, his attorney, and even some sympathetic neighbors who rallied around him. They helped him stay grounded, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. Their encouragement fueled his resolve, giving him the strength to push forward despite the challenges. By the time the dust began to settle, Jason realized that Karen's actions had changed him in ways he never anticipated. The experience had stripped away his naivety, forcing him to see the darker side of human nature. But it had also taught him resilience, courage, and the importance of standing up for what's right. As he prepared to take the next steps in rebuilding his life, Jason knew one thing for certain: he wouldn't let Karen or anyone else dictate his future ever again. The courtroom was packed on the day of Karen's trial. Neighbors, reporters, and curious onlookers filled every available seat, their whispers creating a low hum that buzzed through the air. Jason sat in the front row, his hands clasped tightly together, trying to steady his nerves. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. After months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and endless frustration, justice was finally within reach. But as much as he wanted closure, Jason couldn't ignore the knot of anxiety twisting in his stomach. What if something went wrong? What if Karen somehow managed to wriggle free from accountability? Karen, dressed in a plain gray suit, looked nothing like the confident, domineering woman Jason had known from HOA meetings. Her usual air of superiority had vanished, replaced by a defeated slouch. She avoided eye contact with anyone, especially Jason, her face pale and drawn. Sitting beside her lawyer, she fidgeted nervously with a tissue, occasionally dabbing at her eyes as though she were shedding tears of remorse. But Jason wasn't fooled. He knew better than to mistake her performance for genuine regret. The prosecution began its case by presenting the mountain of evidence collected during the investigation. Detective Harris took the stand first, recounting how the fraudulent sale had been uncovered and detailing the role Karen played in orchestrating it. His testimony was calm but firm, leaving no room for doubt about her involvement. Next came the notary, who had failed to verify Karen's identity properly. Visibly uncomfortable under cross-examination, the notary admitted to cutting corners and expressed regret for enabling the scam. But the most damning evidence came in the form of digital records, text messages, emails, and financial transactions that painted a clear picture of Karen's intentions. The prosecutor projected screenshots onto a large screen for everyone in the courtroom to see. One message read, "We need to make sure this goes smoothly. No mistakes." Another outlined specific instructions for staging the house down, to rearranging furniture to make rooms appear larger. There were even receipts showing luxury purchases Karen had made using funds from the sale, including designer handbags and spa treatments. Each piece of evidence chipped away at Karen's credibility, exposing her lies and revealing the true extent of her greed. Karen's defense attorney tried to paint her as a victim of circumstance, claiming she had been manipulated by Greg, the handyman. "My client was misled," the lawyer argued passionately. "She believed she was part of a harmless prank meant to teach Mr. Thompson a lesson, not a criminal act." The argument might have held water if it weren't for the overwhelming proof of Karen's active participation. It was clear to everyone in the room, including the judge, that Karen had been the driving force behind the scheme, not an unwitting pawn. As the trial progressed, witnesses from the neighborhood stepped forward to testify against Karen. One, Elderly couple described how she had bullied them into repainting their fence because it didn't match her preferred color palette. A young mother recounted how Karen had threatened fines over her children's toys left in the driveway. These stories painted a chilling portrait of a woman obsessed with control, someone who thrived on wielding power over others. For many neighbors, the trial offered a chance to confront the fear and intimidation they had endured for years. As each witness spoke, Karen's facade crumbled further until she seemed like a shadow of her former self. Jason also took the stand, recounting how the fraudulent sale had upended his life. He spoke candidly about the shock and panic he felt upon learning his house had been sold without his knowledge. His voice cracked slightly when he described the betrayal he experienced, not just from Karen, but from the entire system that had allowed such a thing to happen. "This wasn't just my home," he said, looking directly at Karen for the first time. "It was my sanctuary, the place where I felt safe, and she took that away from me." His words resonated deeply with those in attendance, drawing nods of sympathy from the crowd. Even the judge appeared moved, pausing briefly before asking Jason if he had anything else to add. Jason shook his head, his expression resolute. He didn't need to say more. His pain and determination were written all over his face. After days of testimony, closing arguments, and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. When the foreperson stood to deliver the decision, the courtroom fell silent. "Guilty," they announced, their voices echoing through the tense atmosphere. Karen was convicted on multiple charges including identity theft, forgery, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Gasps rippled through the gallery, followed by murmurs of relief. Justice had been served. The sentencing hearing took place a week later. Given the severity of her crimes, Karen faced significant penalties. The judge sentenced her to 5 years in prison without parole eligibility, citing the deliberate and calculated nature of her actions. In addition, she was ordered to pay restitution to Jason, covering the costs of reversing the fraudulent sale and repairing any damage caused to his property. As the gavel struck the bench, signaling the end of the proceedings, Jason exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. It was over. Finally, it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Jason, eager to hear his thoughts on the outcome. Despite the media frenzy, he remained composed, speaking slowly and deliberately. "I never thought I'd find myself in a situation like this," he admitted, "but I hope this case serves as a reminder that no one is above the law. What happened to me shouldn't happen to anyone else." His statement was met with applause from the crowd, many of whom lingered to offer words of support. In the weeks that followed, Karen's arrest became a national sensation. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing her HOA Karen and highlighting the absurdity of her actions. Social media exploded with memes and commentary, turning her into a symbol of unchecked entitlement and toxic behavior. The attention brought renewed scrutiny to homeowners associations across the country, prompting calls for greater oversight and transparency. Lawmakers introduced bills aimed at strengthening regulations governing HOAs, ensuring that cases like Jason's wouldn't slip through the cracks again. For Jason, the aftermath of the trial marked a new chapter in his life. While he was grateful for the resolution, he couldn't deny the toll it had taken on him emotionally and financially. Reversing the fraudulent sale required countless hours of legal work and negotiations, and squatters who had briefly occupied his house during the chaos had left behind significant damage. Windows were broken, walls were scuffed, and appliances were missing. Repairing everything would take time and effort, but Jason refused to let it discourage him. Instead, he viewed the process as an opportunity to rebuild, not just his home, but his sense of security and peace. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now approached Jason with warmth and solidarity. Some offered to help with repairs, while others simply stopped by to check in and express their support. The ordeal had brought the community closer together, fostering a newfound spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. Gone were the days of Karen's tyrannical rule. In her absence, the HOA began implementing reforms to prevent similar abuses of power in the future. Jason also found himself reflecting on the lessons he had learned throughout the experience. He realized that while setbacks could be devastating, they could also inspire growth and resilience. The ordeal had taught him to advocate for himself, to trust his instincts, and to stand up for what was right, even when it felt daunting. Though he never imagined becoming an accidental activist, Jason embraced the role, using his platform to raise awareness about real estate fraud and the importance of accountability within HOAs. As he stood on the porch of his newly repaired home, one evening watching the sunset bathe the neighborhood in golden light, Jason felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but he knew he had the strength to face whatever challenges came his way. His house, though battered and bruised, still stood, a testament to perseverance, justice, and the unyielding human spirit. And, for the first time in a long while, Jason felt truly at home. Jason stood outside his house looking at the freshly painted front door and the neatly trimmed lawn. It had been months since the trial ended, and while the scars of what happened would always linger, he could finally breathe easy again. The repairs were complete. New windows gleamed in the sunlight. Appliances hummed softly in the kitchen, and every corner of the house sparked with life. But it wasn't just the physical space that felt renewed. Jason himself had changed. He had emerged from the chaos stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever to protect not only his home, but also others who might find themselves vulnerable to similar schemes. The neighborhood seemed different too. Karen's arrest had sent shockwaves through the community, forcing everyone to confront uncomfortable truths about power dynamics, accountability, and trust. Neighbors who once tiptoed around her out of fear now spoke openly about their experiences, sharing stories of intimidation and manipulation. These conversations sparked a collective awakening, inspiring residents to demand reforms within the HOA. Gone were the days when one person could dominate decision-making or enforce rules arbitrarily. In Karen's absence, the association transformed into a more collaborative and inclusive body, focused on fostering genuine community spirit rather than rigid compliance. For Jason, this shift was deeply satisfying. He threw himself into advocacy work, using his experience to educate others about real estate fraud and the importance of safeguarding property rights. He partnered with local organizations to host workshops, where he shared practical advice on how homeowners could protect themselves from scams. "Don't assume you're safe just because you follow the rules," he often told attendees. "Be vigilant, stay informed, and never hesitate to ask questions if something doesn't feel right." His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Local news outlets featured Jason in interviews, highlighting his resilience and determination to turn a personal tragedy into something positive. Social media buzzed with praise for his courage, and strangers reached out to thank him for shedding light on an issue many hadn't even realized existed. Some shared their own harrowing tales of HOA disputes or fraudulent activities, grateful to know they weren't alone. Others offered words of encouragement, calling Jason a hero for standing up against injustice. Despite the accolades, Jason remained humble. He didn't see himself as extraordinary, just someone who refused to give up when faced with adversity. Still, he couldn't deny the impact his story had made. Across the country, lawmakers began drafting legislation aimed at preventing similar cases of fraud. Proposals included stricter oversight of title companies, mandatory identity verification during real estate transactions, and harsher penalties for those convicted of property-related crimes. Several states adopted these measures, crediting Jason's case as the catalyst for change. Meanwhile, Karen's name became synonymous with overreach and abuse of power. Behind bars, she struggled to adjust to prison life. Her arrogance and sense of entitlement quickly earned her enemies among fellow inmates, leaving her isolated and bitter. Letters from family members revealed that her reputation had crumbled beyond repair. Friends distanced themselves, ashamed of being associated with her actions. Even Greg, the handyman who had helped orchestrate the scam, cooperated fully with authorities in exchange for reduced charges, further tarnishing Karen's legacy. Back in the neighborhood, life moved forward without her. New faces joined the HOA board, bringing fresh perspectives and ideas. Monthly meetings, once dominated by Karen's tirades, became opportunities for open dialogue and collaboration. Residents took turns organizing events, block parties, charity drives, and seasonal festivals that strengthened bonds and celebrated their shared commitment to making the community better. For the first time in years, Jason looked around and saw smiles instead of scowls, camaraderie instead of conflict. But perhaps the most profound change occurred within Jason himself. Before the ordeal, he had lived quietly, content to keep his head down and avoid trouble. Now he understood the value of speaking up, not just for himself, but for others who lacked a voice. His experience taught him that silence often enabled wrongdoing, while action, no matter how daunting, could inspire meaningful change. This newfound perspective guided him in every aspect of his life, from his career to his relationships. One evening, as Jason sat on his porch sipping coffee, he reflected on how far he'd come. The journey hadn't been easy. There were moments when doubt crept in, when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm him, and when anger clouded his judgment. But through it all, he had persevered, driven by a desire to reclaim not just his house, but his dignity. Looking back, he realized that losing his home had forced him to rediscover what truly mattered: integrity, resilience, and the connections we build with others. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the street, Jason noticed a group of kids playing tag in the cul-de-sac. Their laughter echoed through the air, filling the neighborhood with warmth and joy. It struck him then how much lighter everything felt. The oppressive weight of Karen's presence was gone, replaced by a renewed sense of hope and possibility. This was what he had fought for. Not just a house, but a home surrounded by people who cared about each other. Jason smiled to himself, feeling a deep sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, and challenges would undoubtedly arise in the future. But he knew he had the tools to face them: strength forged in adversity, wisdom gained through struggle, and a community united in purpose. As he stepped inside and closed the door behind him, he whispered a quiet thanks, not just to those who had supported him, but to the universe itself for guiding him through the storm. In the end, Jason's story wasn't just about loss and redemption. It was about transformation. A man who had once been defined by simplicity and routine had become a beacon of hope and resilience. His fight against Karen, and the system that allowed her to act unchecked, had ignited a movement sparking conversations and reforms that extended far beyond his small suburban neighborhood. And though he never sought fame or recognition, Jason knew his legacy would endure, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, justice could prevail and communities could heal.